Dr. Ellen Langer, mother of positive psychology, of mindfulness, with an amazing new book, The Mindful Body. And if there is somebody who can bring light on happiness, what it means, why it's important on this important day, International Day of Happiness, is you. So I'm so glad to see you here. How are you feeling? Are you happy
I'm
today?
good, and it's nice to see you again. And happy day.
Yes. So how are you feeling? Is happiness?
I'm
Why do we
yeah.
celebrate happiness, by the way? Why do you think we should celebrate happiness?
Well, I don't. I would like the day to come where we don't need to celebrate it, where everybody is just happy. And I think that the work I've been doing over the last 45 years suggests to me that it's really a lot easier than most people assume. And essentially, that you can't be happy when you're acting like a robot. You can't be happy when you're mindless, because when you're mindless, you're not there. And you're not there to know you're not there. So, how do you be there? How is it that you can be mindful? This is mindfulness, as I study it, as you know, has nothing to do with meditation. Meditation is fine, it's just different. All you need to do is notice. And as you're noticing, the neurons are firing and it's uplifting, it's energy begetting. And that's the essence of being happy. And the problem is that most of the things in this world teach us to think we know, essentially, when we don't know. And as long as you think you know, you don't pay any attention. So before I started painting, for example, if you had asked me what color are leaves, not in the fall, and I'd say they're green. Then I start painting, I start looking at them. Well, there are hundreds and hundreds of different shades of green, and it changes every time the sun moves slightly in the sky, or I move a little bit, or somebody stands near them to create a bit of a shadow. The point is that everything is always changing. Everything looks different from different perspectives, and we make a mistake by trying to hold things still. Now, the funny thing, Lewis, is that we do this so we can feel some control over the world. But since things aren't staying still, when we hold them still, we're doing ourselves a disservice. And what people need to understand, I think, is that, and I've said this to you so many times, as others probably have, and to your audience, events are not good, they're not bad, they don't lead us to be happy, they don't lead us to be they're nothing. They're just events which we then frame, give meaning to. And the kind of meaning or frame we give to the event determines how we're going to feel about it. So events aren't good or bad. So most people suffer enormously from stress. And it's my view that stress is, in fact, the major killer out there. And stress is psychological. It's not events that cause stress. What causes stress is the view you take of the event. So if you open up that view mindfully and you see it as in so many different ways, and then you can select the view that you find most appealing. If you and I go out to eat and the food is awful, which the food is not going to be awful, but if I decide to view it as awful, that's actually good, because then I'm going to pay more attention to everything you're saying. And then presumably I'd eat less, which would be better for my waistline. The point is that we worry about events being negative when it's our minds that make them positive or negative. Every single negative emotion we have, the emotions that lead us to feel unhappy, are based on our mindlessness, right? People suffer regret, which is one that I find particularly sad, because if you know why you're doing whatever you're doing, even if you decide, today all I feel like doing is sitting in front of a television all day and, as people say, vegging out. That's fine. As long as you're choosing to do it, then later you're not going to regret not having done something else with your time. But implicit in the idea of regret is that the other alternative would have been better. Now, even if events did carry with them positive or negative valence, there's no reason to believe the unchosen alternative would have been better. Could have been worse, could have been the same. But again, the more important thing is that we're not saddled with circumstances. We create the circumstances for ourselves. And when people realize the control that they have in doing this, I think burdens are lifted, and people start to live the kind of life that I think they should live. You know, years ago, I used to say, most of us are sealed in unlived lives, and we're oblivious to it. You know, we do it, we're told, we behave, we do things according to instructions that somebody else gave us. You know, we're not actively choosing how we want to be. And this choice is always available to us. And I can just go on for 3 hours, but let me stop and give you a chance to ask me a question.
No, but you know how important it is that you elaborate your thinking, and because woman here, and you have so many elements to connect. So I think it's so important that you can elaborate, and I think it's beautiful as well the way you that you interconnect different
Yeah.
elements, because
Well,
we
let
know,
me,
yeah,
no, I was just saying, let me say a couple of more things about
okay,
stress, because this is, I think, one of the most important things that make people unhappy.
okay.
And that, you know, if you were stressed and you simply said to yourself, let me think about the last 2 or 3 times I was stressed, what happened? You know, and probably the thing you were worried about never happened in the first place. And you lived to tell the tale. So even if it did happen, it was less awful than you were anticipating. You know, people need to understand, to ask themselves, when they're stressed, is it a tragedy or an inconvenience? And almost always, you know, I you know, got in a minor accident with the car. I didn't finish the project on time. I missed the deadline. You know, so what? You know, and that's one of the beauties of getting older, Luis, which sometimes people are afraid of. But you know, you see that so many of the things that you worried about, they just don't matter. You know, I wrote a little piece years ago, a little blog. You know, remember when you're 2 years old and you fall and you scrape your leg and you're crying, screaming bloody murder as if the world's going to come apart. And then you're 7 years old and you're in elementary school and Johnny or Janie doesn't send you a Valentine and you feel destroyed, you know, and then you're 14 years old and you get some pimples and oh my God, I'm ugly. My life is going to be, and this just keeps happening. At some point, you know, you get a little older and you look back and you say, gee, none of those things were tragic in the way I worried that they would be. Another thing that makes people stress, which I think is, again, the major reason they're going to be unhappy, is because they have a misguided understanding of how to make decisions. And the experts tell you, essentially, to do some kind of cost benefit analysis. And so in the mindful body, I argue against this very strongly, because if every cost is a benefit, because it's neither a cost nor a benefit, it's all in your head, then you can't add them up to tell you where to go, right? The plus and the minus gives you nothing. The other thing is that when you make a decision to take some action. When you take the action, the game has changed. You can never assess what other actions would have been. You know, you can't say, well, let's see, should I have a baby or not? Well, what I'll do is I'll live my life not having a baby, and then I'll live my life having a baby, and I'll compare the two. You can't do that. All right. Now, interestingly, that every piece of information you consider may change the decision you're about to make. And there's no endpoint to the information to consider. This can sound complicated, but let me just cut to the chase. People need, I believe, and I have some data based on this, rather than waste your time trying to make the right decision, make the decision right. What, flip a coin, randomly decide, and then whatever happens, make it work. And I asked my students in an advanced decision-making class to do this. I said, don't make any decisions all week. Just use some rule of thumb. You flip a coin or decide the first alternative that occurs to you is what you're going to choose, and so on. They come back at the end of the week. So how are it? Was a wonderful week. It was stress-free, because the stress comes from worrying. Did they make the wrong decision? Which you can never assess. So, so I think if we make little changes like this, that we ask ourselves if we're stressed, is it a tragedy or an inconvenience? When we're making decisions and getting stressed, and we realize there's no way to know. Let me just randomly decide, and whatever happens, I'm going to make it work for me. Then these burdens are lifted, and then you can just go about your business being mindful. And essentially, Luis, that's all happiness is. Now, that people think they need certain outcomes to be happy. They need to go on a vacation to be happy. They need to be with somebody in particular to be, and all of that is a fiction. Happiness is the simple process of noticing things. And as you notice it, you feel engaged, you feel excited. And you shouldn't be, I think, spending all your time evaluating, well, am I happy? Because when you're happy, you're not evaluating. You can be either a self that's experiencing or a self that's evaluating. And if you're an experiencing self, at the end of the day, the month, the life, you have a bigger self that you could have evaluated. So anyway, there, I threw enough at you.
I love it. It's noticing. Happiness is noticing. I love it. What do we do when imagine that now we know that this is about noticing, that this is about non-attachment to outcomes, that this is about being mindful and not mindless. But at the same time, we keep having all this systemic pressure around us that without willing to follow it, somehow we feel the pressure that we have to do it because the system is asking us for results.
Well,
Is
yeah,
asking us
no,
for
we have been
outcomes. What do
taught.
we do?
Well, I mean, I agree with you completely. The system has taught us to be mindless. Right. So the first thing is to recognize that we don't know. I don't know. You don't know. Nobody knows. You can't know because everything is changing and everything looks different from different perspectives. So when you're feeling trapped, recognize that the way you're considering doing whatever it is, or somebody asking you to do whatever it is, was just one of many possibilities, and vary it so it works for you. I learned this when I was very young. I went into I was giving a lecture. I walk in the room, the podium is here, and the chairs for the audience way back there. And I thought, oh, that's going to make me very nervous being so far from the people I'm going to be speaking to. So I moved all the chairs. Now, most people act as if the way things are is the way they have to be. And my way of being in this world is if anything doesn't work, change it, because everything was just somebody's decision. Sometimes there are people who are going to take you to task for this. But to my mind, it's worth the potential cost. Because, so I talk a lot about the medical world and medicine and health in the mindful body. And, there are doctors, some doctors, nobody should do this, but who might tell you, for instance, you have 3 months to live. There is no way that they can know this. So, but let's say this is the system, for example, as you're speaking, the system says you have 3 months to live. Well, you step back and say, they can't know this. And then you create, the life that you want. And if you're being mindful rather than depressed for those 3 months, chances are your life is going to go far beyond that. We all know people who were told they were supposed to die in a month, 6 months, years later. This is a funny story. My mother had breast cancer. And she's in the hospital. And this woman, we didn't know who she was, but she walks in. She saw on the thing, my mother's name was Sylvia. She said, Sylvia, I have to tell you something. What? She said, 6 months ago, they told, no, excuse me. Yeah, 6 months ago, they told me I have a month to live. I went ahead and I spent all my money. And now I'm still alive and I don't have the funds, to tell her they just don't know. All right, whatever you're told, I don't know if I'm making this as clear as I want to, but small deviations from how you're told to do something make big differences. So if you're told to hold a tennis racket this way, for example, and it doesn't feel comfortable to you, and you vary it ever so slightly, you're going to be present, it's going to fit, and chances are you're going to end up playing a better game of tennis. Everything that we're told is based on the norm, but in some very real way, none of us is us. Nobody is the norm. The most, extreme example, let's say you make $1 million a year and I'm unemployed. That would mean the average income is 500,000, but it doesn't represent either one of us. So we need to know everything is created for some median or norm, and not for us. So we should then recreate it so it better meets our needs.
So do you have after all the research, incredible research that you went through, do you have a recommendation for people who want to be mindful of their own being and the system interconnected? It's like I am aware of me and I am aware of the system, and I get the best out of the combination of both through my thinking, my behavior. Do you have a recommendation for that?
Well, I think probably just what I've just said is to recognize that whatever is was just a decision. It was just one of many ways that it could be. So if it doesn't fit, change it. And I think that when people become more mindful, all of the things that you're suggesting naturally change. So how do you become more mindful? So there are really two ways. The best way, but it's hard for people, is just accept you don't know. And if you know you don't know, then everything is new. So when I give lectures, and I might have said this to you in another interview, Luis, I ask people, so how much is 1 + 1? Because this is the thing everybody thinks they know the best. Everybody's sure of it. And oh, by the way, I even asked this of chat. So of artificial intelligence, how much is one? And chat and all the people I ask say 2. And I asked chat again. I said, wait, what else could it be? 1 and 1 is 2. But no, even the thing we know, think we know the best, we've got wrong. If you add 1 cloud plus 1 cloud, 1 + 1 is 1. You add 1 pile of laundry plus 1 pile of laundry, 1 + 1 is 1. You add 1 wad of chewing gum to 1 wad of chewing gum, 1 + 1 is 1. So in the real world, 1 + 1 probably doesn't equal 2 as or more often as it does. But now think about it, at least. After, and it's a very remote possibility, but after we get off, somebody comes over to you and says, Luis, how much is 1 + 1? You're not going to mindlessly say 2. You're going to pay some attention to the context, and then you're going to answer mindfully and say, I don't know what you say, could be 2. Or you could say, it could be 1, depending on whether you want to stick it to them, teach them something, or not. But it's a very different way of being, proceeding with an awareness that we don't know, that things are changing, and that in a sense, everything is potentially new. So if you start to question the things you think make predictions about your spouse, and then test them, and you're going to find, gee, there are occasions where you're wrong. I thought he's so sloppy, surely he's going to leave the plates on the table for me to, oh, well, look at that, he cleaned up after himself. Whatever the case may be. So we notice when things are different, when things are new. But another way to get to that place is to intentionally notice new things about the things you think you know. And so for that, if you're at work, notice 3 new things about the person next to you. Notice 3 new things about the assignment that you're working on. And you do this over and over again. You say, wow, just like as I said before, leaves aren't green. I mean, they are, but there's so much more than that. And so every time you see you didn't know it fully, you become a little less certain. And with that, a little more mindful and a little happier. The key when you discover you don't know is to remember that nobody knows. So you're not inferior. I mean, if somebody asks you a question and you think you have to know, and you think that they know, then people often pretend. So I'm here to tell everybody, nobody knows, nobody can know. So every experience you give yourself and you notice the ways it's new and you see how exciting that is, the way that feels leads you to do that more and more often. And then it all becomes just sort of the natural way. I was giving a talk the other day and somebody said to me, well, don't you get nervous? And I said, no, why should I get nervous? Somebody asked me a question I don't know the answer to. I say, I don't know. Why should that be so hard? Worrying about people evaluating you. People are going to evaluate you, but no matter what you do, the evaluation can be either positive or negative, and you can't control it. Which is, somebody also asked me the other day, of all the things that I've found, and remember, I've been doing this work for so many decades, and we have people living longer, big changes in health. But oddly, the thing that was most important to me was the realization that behavior makes sense from the actor's perspective, or else the actor wouldn't do it. Now, that means every single time we're evaluating somebody negatively, we're being mindless, because from that person's perspective, it makes some sense. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, today I'm going to be obnoxious, rude, and ignorant. So every time we're calling somebody by any of these terms or any negative term, we could instead say, well, what sense does that make? So, for instance, you might not like me because I'm gullible. And oh, Luis, you have no idea how gullible. I am really gullible. And you tell me, Ellen, how could you be so gullible? And then we both get me to try to change. We're not going to succeed, because from my perspective, I'm being trusting, not gullible. Although when you make me look back at myself the way you're looking at me, I see that they're the same thing. You drive me crazy because you're so damn inconsistent. Well, your intention is not to be inconsistent. What is your intention? Is to be flexible. So the point is that if we see that every single thing we call somebody by a negative name has an opposite positive valence, we might not want them to change. You might not want me to be less gullible if that means I have to be less trusting. I certainly don't want you to be less inconsistent if that means you're going to be less flexible. And we did this study forever ago. It's fun. We give people 100, 300, I don't remember, behavior descriptions. And we say, okay, circle those things you keep trying to change and you can't change. So for me, I'd circle impulsive, gullible. You don't have to know the rest of them. You turn the page over in a mixed up order, circle those things you really value about yourself. My spontaneity and my being trusting. As long as I value being spontaneous, I'm going to at times appear impulsive. As long as I value being trusting, I'm going to at times appear gullible. And so you can see, I think, if I've made it clear, which is my intention, that relationships, just by realizing that the person's behavior makes sense and doing some of the work or even asking them to make sense for you of it, we no longer judge people. We don't judge ourselves, because when we did something, it also made sense, or else we wouldn't have done it. And then things just become nicer, and it's easier to be mindful in a nicer world. The happier you are, the nicer you are. The nicer you are, the happier you're going to be, because of all the positive feedback you get. A little, I don't know if this follows at all, but I suggest to my students that they take what they do seriously, but don't take yourself so seriously. So if we all, become a little more lighthearted, less judgmental, life really will change in a very positive way for all of us.
Wow. So many, I would say, breakthrough insights for this International Day of Happiness. Is there, Dr. Ellen Langer, is there anything that we're still missing and we should be focusing on in order to understand even better how we can get to, this is a goal of our foundation, 10 billion happier people by 2050. We are 8 billion people in the planet today. We might
Yeah.
be more in the future.
Well,
How do
I
we
tell
get,
you, yeah.
how do I get to the most number of people happy? What are we missing? What are we
Okay,
missing
so
that we
there are
can
there are there are a couple of things. First, I think imagine you have a rail here, and you're running against the rail, and it just keeps squeaking, and it's terrible. People need to know that if they move over just ever so slightly, it's a smoother ride. So the point being, to make the change from where you are to where you might be much happier doesn't have to be a big deal. It's a simple thing, possibly for people to realize that our experience is a function of our thoughts. Our thoughts are under our control. Everything can be understood in multiple ways. So that anytime you are unhappy, ask yourself how you might rethink it. In fact, all of us know somebody who, in that same circumstance, wouldn't be unhappy. Well, how could that be? So, it's clear it's not the situation that's making you unhappy. It's the way you're understanding it. So, then attempt to understand it differently. But in a larger way, Luis, my next goal, my next big project, which is in some ways a continuation of all the mindfulness work I've been doing, is essentially to take the vertical where you and I sit near the top, right? So people here are great, people here, not so much, and make it horizontal with the realization that everybody has talents, everybody knows things that other people don't know. And if people don't let themselves be put on, let's say, this normal distribution, the normal distribution is some people, they've got a lot, most people are, and then some people awful. Well, who created that distribution? Who decided, how we should measure ourselves? And so we need to recognize that there's enough room, a sense for all of us at the top. The things that are worth, that make life worthwhile are not zero sum. It's not if you have them, then there are fewer for me to have. That we can all feel good about ourselves. And it's a cheap feeling good by comparing yourself with somebody else and thinking that you're better. It's also short lived because if you do organize yourself in this way by constantly comparing to other people, you're going to meet somebody who's far better than you. And then you're going to feel bad. To recognize that all of us know something other people don't know. All of us have individual talents. Now, this may seem sort of, namby-pamby, not a big deal, but it's so different from the way everything operates in this culture. I was thinking the other day, if you take somebody with a learning disability, I don't know if it's still called dyslexia, but it used to be, and you give them a page to read. This page probably has 250 words on it. At most, they're going to get 3 words wrong. That means they're getting over 98% correct. Why are we focusing on the 3 words they got wrong? All right. So what we need to do is find our unique ways of doing things, our individual talents. And it doesn't mean, so for me, I use the example of tennis a lot, that I play a lot of doubles. And I recognize that the fact that there are 2 serves doesn't come from the heavens. Again, everything that is was just somebody's decision. So if you play with me, Luis, we're going to have 3 serves. Why? Because I throw the first one, I kill it, it doesn't go in. Now I throw it up again and I kill it because I have a backup 3rd serve. So I've learned something. The way the game is played now, professionally, I throw it up, I hit it, doesn't go in. I'm afraid to learn from that because I don't want a double fault. All right. So it doesn't mean that you can't play within the rules that exist, but you have to understand that the more different you are from the person who wrote those rules, the less well those rules are going to work for you. So I know that my serve would be better if I had written the rules. All right. So it's not the case that if we had, tennis from top to bottom, that here's my place. No, here's my place down here, only because the person who decided how it should be played is different. When I give these talks, I often look in the audience. I say, is there any tall guy here? I'm 5'3". Somebody always there about 6'5". He comes up. We look ridiculous next to each other, right? I ask him to put his hand up. His hand is 3 inches larger than mine. And then I say, should we do anything physical the same way? I reach for the dishes in the kitchen and infrequently, but still on occasion, the dish drops. Is it because I'm clumsy, or is it because I'm not as tall as the person who created the shelves? It says it's all the way up there. So what we need to know that if we started from scratch, each of us would create a world that fit for us better. Now, when you're sharing space with other people, you can't always do this. Sometimes you can rearrange things, do things differently, but you can always know that your lack of full proficiency is only because of somebody else's decisions, not because of an inherent incompetence. I've probably said too much with this, but the idea is that when you change the criteria, those on top are not going to be on top, those on the bottom, and each time you change it and changing it over time, sometimes you're on top, sometimes you're not, that I taught this little song to my grandkids when they were 5 years old. And essentially, it's everybody doesn't know something, everyone knows something else, everyone can't do something, everyone can do something else. Now we're riding, excuse me, in the car. One of them starts to whistle. I said, Theo, you're such a good whistler. At that point, his twin brother says, Grandma Elle, when Theo was learning to whistle, I was learning something else. Now, I don't know if it's clear, quickly going through this, how different that is from the way we're all brought up. Because more typically, if I or society praised somebody else is going to feel inferior. Some of those people who feel inferior may just drop out. Rather than realize that's great, you can do that, I can do this, you show me how to do your thing, I'll show you how to do mine. It's just a very different world than the zero sum, one winner, one loser world that we've been brought up in. Anyway.
Yeah, it's so different. Actually, I don't think I ever asked you about surrender and spirituality. When we look at Indian culture, I love to be there. I just came from Auroville. The more you talk to spiritual leaders, the more you realize the importance of surrender. So Satyananda is the spiritual concept of truth, existence, and bliss. So it's basically a spiritual joy. And happiness is actually the bridge between that spiritual joy and material world. Do you link what you are saying to surrender at some point?
No,
what spiritual element of this?
Well, in our culture, the word surrender means somebody else has won and you've lost. And, so I don't like the expression. I think that when we realize there are so many ways of winning, and if this particular way doesn't work for you, rather than trying it over and over and over again, perhaps, try some other way. I think that what they mean by surrender is a recognition in some ways that there are many ways of reaching the goal you're interested in reaching. And so you don't have to keep, like a dog with a bone. But, even that metaphor, because I've been told, I'm like a dog with a bone, I don't give up. The dog is having a good time with that bone. And so I don't think that people should necessarily surrender. I don't think that people shouldn't surrender as you mean it. I think people need to realize that the whole activity, in some sense, is made up. That when you're doing this thing, thinking that your world depends on it, all of that is a fiction. And that as soon as you realize that there are multiple ways of meeting your needs, you would naturally, quote, surrender when it just became, too much. It's, you say, we have the notion of the fox and the grapes. So the fox is trying to get the grapes and they're too high up. And so the fox leaves, and purportedly the fox is saying to himself, well, the grapes were probably sour. Now, and we call this rationalizing, but it doesn't have to be. The fox can keep trying to get the grapes. The fox should know maybe the grapes are sour. Maybe this thing that we're after um, isn't um, isn't going to meet our needs, isn't important. So it's sort of like you have to question why you're doing this thing that you're doing. And if doing it is fun, trying to get the grapes, whatever, keep doing it. But you have to ask yourself questions about it, because so many of the things we begin when we're young, and we keep doing them without saying, well, do we really even care about this anymore? So surrender, in some sense, to me, in this regard, means changing our mind, becoming aware that we don't have to pursue whatever we're pursuing. Either we don't have to pursue that end, or we can pursue that end in very different ways. And you're not going to come to that unless you stop for a moment, and ask yourself, do I want to be doing this? If yes, do it. If no, stop. Is there another way to do this? If yes, and that other way is fun, do it that other way. I think that one of the things that people don't realize is that, because I just said the word fun, people think some things are fun and some things are not, and that you have to do some of those things that are not fun. And I don't, my personal experience is just very different from that. Everything that I do is fun. Even when I'm using the water pick, it doesn't matter. You're there. I'm guessing, will it be this way, that way? And I couldn't imagine having a job where people think work has to be stressful. And then they need a vacation because they've been mindless for 40 hours a week it's unbearable that no matter what you're doing, there's a way of doing it mindfully that will be more interesting to you, that may lead to bigger rewards, that may not. But to just blindly think you need to get those grapes without questioning, even hungry, seems to me what too many people are doing, and they see themselves on a treadmill, for instance.
Yeah. So just to wrap up this another amazing conversation, what makes a day worth living for you? What do you
For me, no, I tell you, Luis, it's so simple. Life only consists of moments. That's it. So if you make the moment matter, your life matters. And it's so much easier to make a moment matter than to make a day, a week, a year, meaningful. It's sort of, somebody was asking me again the other day about a bucket list. I don't have a bucket list. A bucket list is, oh, if only I could do this thing, and maybe eventually I'll be able to do whatever that thing is. But no matter what you're doing, if you're doing it fully, you can't do more than that. So I'm having a wonderful conversation with you. I'm enjoying you. I hope that some of the information I'm giving is useful to some people out there. I don't need to be in Paris right now. I don't need to be, celebrating or making a lot of, that. All you can do is make the moment important to you. And then it's all important at the end of the day. So if I were to ask people, how much do you need a vacation? That could be the biggest tell about how mindless they are, not want a vacation. Because to feel you need a vacation means you're not enjoying what you're doing. And, so if you're enjoying what you're doing, then you don't need to be doing something else. You don't need to have a bucket list. You don't regret not having done this, that, or the other thing. And the way to make it enjoyable is to be there and notice things about it. It doesn't matter whether you're sewing, whether, it doesn't matter how small the activity or how big the activity. The simple act of noticing, the neurons are firing, you're engaged. And not only is it figuratively enlivening, it's literally enlivening. What better thing, to be doing something that feels so good and is good for you. So anyway, I wish everybody on this special day of world happiness, great happiness. And to me, the more mindful you are, the more you'll achieve all of the goals that are actually important.
Well, we are still pending. We have a tennis match pending, but I feel that it's going to be tough because you are going to be enjoying every single ball.
That's right. I'm going to
And
be
you're going to be
enjoying it.
focused.
Yeah. And when it was kind of fun because I'm older, and I play with older people that, nobody ever remembers what the score is because you're playing it just to enjoy the point, and also that, who decided how to score. For me, if in anything I'm doing, but let's say playing tennis, if I hit a spectacular shot, even if they return it and I miss the shot that they return, I still feel good. Wow, look at that. That was better than, the last time I tried that. So there are many ways for us to assess how competent we are. For me, if I'm playing basketball, I shoot the ball, and let's say the ball now goes around the rim and falls out. To me, that's a hit because it would be so easy for it to, instead of going this way, to be a basket. So I think we're taught just ridiculous things. I think almost counts. And if we expand, we can call our latitude of acceptance, we're going to feel better about ourselves because we're going to have that many more successes.
Well, Leslie, I take it like this: almost counts, and notice, and you have to notice is you have to notice that almost counts.
Right.
Well, happy of International Day of Happiness. It's always amazing talking to you. Thank you so much for who you are, for your wisdom and everything that you embody. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Luis. Stay well.
Stay well. Bye.